Whether it would have been passed by this rather conservative Congress had it not been for the death of Dr. King and the 30-odd others who died in the ensuing riots can never be proved. In any case, all civil rights leaders and most urbanologists agree that there will be a great deal more violence, accelerating violence, unless the Congress does a great deal more, not only to secure political freedom for the Negro, but to improve the quality of his life. A common modest estimate is an additional $10 billion a year. Gunnar Myrdal, the Swedish sociologist who's been studying the problem for 40 years, says simply trillions. On the other hand, the present Congress is less disposed toward social innovation than its predecessor, and its successor may be less sympathetic. And any president, whatever his personal assessment, is unlikely to ask the Congress for a great deal more than he can expect to get. And the people as a whole may be less sympathetic to the urban Negro than the Congress as a whole. Many a white American is willing to have a Negro in the next voting booth, but not in the next house. Well, to discuss the events of the past week and project them into the future, we have called together three well-known civil rights leaders, a member of Congress, an urbanologist, and a conservative journalist. But first, an excerpt from President Johnson's remarks as he signed the Civil Rights Bill today and called for additional legislation.
So I would appeal to my fellow Americans by saying the only real road to progress for free people is through the process of law. And that is the road that America will travel. So I urge the Congress to enact the measures for social justice that I have recommended in some 20 messages. These messages went to the Congress in January and February of this year. They broke a precedent by being completed and delivered and read and printed. These measures provide more than $78 billion that I have urged the Congress to enact for a major domestic program for all Americans in the fiscal 1969 budget.
Now for some of the details of the bill signed today and of the other measures Mr. Johnson has proposed, from Kilpatrick, nationally syndicated columnist and former editor of the Richmond, Virginia News Leader, and Congressman Charles Mathias, Jr., Republican congressman from Maryland and candidate for the United States Senate. First of all, may I ask our guests in New York City, what do you think of the bill passed today, signed today? Mr. McKissick.
Well, first of all, I don't think too much of the bill. I think that there is a hidden agenda within this bill. The only thing that I'd like to know, how can I benefit by the passage of this bill? The only thing in this bill is some housing, providing I've got a job, I've got some money, and I've got a desire to move out of Harlem to some open housing. This bill will benefit possibly 10% of the black people in this country who seek really integrated housing. And for that portion of it, these are the people that will benefit by this bill. The other hidden agenda part in this bill is just like swapping a piece of candy for a dose of arsenic. When you look and see how the word riot is defined, interstate commerce, and what you're doing is actually setting up some new constitutional rights to freedom of speech. And then even in the housing bill, what we are concerned with is not giving black people immediate citizenship. You're talking about developing it over a period of months and a period of years span. It applied to duplex dwellings and all this type of thing. The black man wants some instant citizenship. He doesn't want citizenship in degrees. And the Congress better understand that. And while everybody's so happy on the Hill down now about what you've got, you haven't really affected the black people, and you can't fool them with a dose of bill called civil rights, because we just got nomenclature on this bill, and we got a whole lot of things hidden underneath it. And I think I'll stop at this time in order to let the other fellas tell you about some of the other things.
There is a third section of the bill to protect civil rights workers. Mr. Foreman is one who has been a civil rights worker in some difficult situations in the South. Do you think that provision is useful?
No, I don't think that provision is useful. I don't think any of the provisions are useful. We've had tremendous amount of laws passed by the Congress before, and they have not been implemented. There's still areas of the Deep South where there are no federal registrars, but more important is that this bill moves this country more and more on the road toward Hitler's Germany, because everything that Hitler did was legal. President Johnson wishes us to live under law, but at the same time, the only way that the fascists in Germany were prosecuted were through the Nuremberg trials and those procedures. But yet when people who opposed the war in Vietnam appealed to the Nuremberg provisions, then of course that's in violation, because that's not in accordance with the rule of law in the United States. And in fact, what the Congress has done in this bill is to make it possible for the states and for the city police and for the federal government to put black people in concentration camps, because they define the riots as an assemblage of 3 or more persons. And the Attorney General Ramsey Clark has already said that the inciting to riot bill, which was passed in D.C., has put many black people in the city of D.C. in jail already, some 4,000. I don't know how many under that provisions. And what they're trying to do is to use military solutions for political problems in this country. And so that what we have, and if you will check the debates and the history of this bill, the reason that it was passed, when it came out as just an open housing bill without all of these amendments, the civil disorder section, which your announcer didn't mention, there's another section about civil disorders. When the section on riots, the Southern congressmen, the crackers down there from Louisiana, jumped on this whole situation and said, okay, if you're going to have open housing, then we're going to get Stokely Carmichael, we're going to get Rap Brown. We're going to try to make these two men the scapegoats for all of the evils of this particular country. They're not the scapegoats. Rap Brown is illegally confined now in Virginia. 125 cities rebelled after the assassination of Dr. King. Rap Brown was in jail, held illegally in the state of Maryland, and I wish this congressman would speak to the fact, why is it that the Cambridge report dealing with Maryland was suppressed from the President's Commission on Civil Disorders, which clearly vindicated Rap Brown, which clearly stated that the riots, or rather rebellions in the city of, or rather that fire and situation there in Cambridge was caused by the white sheriff who shot Rap Brown as he was turning a corner. That's in the suppressed report. The American people do not know about this report. Just a moment, let me finish this now, because we have to understand that white fascism is the key problem in this country, and it's not a housing bill. And when the President and the Congress, and they can't do it because of the white fascism which is inherent in the Congress and in the President itself. When we begin to deal with that problem, then we can talk about some kind of human rights bill for 1968.
Mr. Williams, is your verdict on the bill equally negative?
Well, I would have to say that really this bill, in dealing with the ills of this country, is probably like giving an elephant who is suffering from malnutrition a peanut. The Congress, as Jim said, truly is more entrenching the ills and the doom of this country by fooling its citizenry that is doing something for the problem which it'll finally face, or will cause this country to burn like Rome while Nero fiddled. I think personally they're venting their conscience for Dr. King being murdered. I don't think the bill would have passed had not Dr. King been assassinated.
May I ask you what your...
Let me just say this, and I'm sick and tired, and I hope this country will, the Congress should, if not the Congress, then the people should be tired of murderers murdering people unjustly and then taking that same atrocity and giving it back to them in a different form and saying, these are your rights. For instance, there were many murders committed.
Right.
On school integration. You remember Mississippi, right. All the rest of the places.
Right.
Still you don't have any school integration in this country. 4 little girls was murdered in Birmingham. What was the result? They gave us a phony civil rights bill that only the classes of the black people could enjoy, who weren't interested in going downtown anyway because of their fabulous neighborhoods.
Mr. Williams,
then it came along, they killed Jimmy Lee Jackson, and they gave us some phony voters bill where white folks are still stealing and robbing and taking the election in the eyes of the federal government, who is doing nothing about it.
That's right.
Now then, after all the riots and the murderers muttering of people who just couldn't take it any longer. They come up with some totally inadequate poverty bill. I'm just saying this. Here's what I'm saying.
Go ahead.
It's too little.
It's too late.
It's too late. And you're not doing anything but more frustrating the minds of the black man who will not accept it any longer.
Mr. Williams, do you happen to know, sir, whether Dr. King was asked before his death whether he was for or against this bill and what he replied?
We discussed it many times. And as far as Dr. King was concerned, and as far as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference is concerned, this bill is an aspirin for cancer in the blood. It is nothing. You see, just like Mr. McKissick said, it's too late. The bill was obsolete before it was even proposed. Black people are not concerned now basically. It's not one of their basic needs to run out in the white neighborhood. Our basic need now is to make our neighborhoods a haven of beauty.
And so
we won't have to wait. That's the thing. See, the slum that surrounds us is not our major problem. The slum is that within us. So you're giving us something too little, too late. You're not doing anything but frustrating the minds of people.
Not only that,
Gentlemen, we'll get back to you in a moment. We do have three guests here we've not heard from yet. Congressman Mathias, may I ask you, sir, whether you would like to reply to the specific question posed by Mr. Floorman, and also how you react to these criticisms of the bill as one who voted for it yesterday?
Well, let me respond to that, first of all. I find that there's a certain element of encouragement here because I think we're beginning to focus in on the same problems. And this is a very desirable thing. In other words, I think what comes through from the comments that we've heard from New York is that housing is the problem, and not just open housing. Now, this is a specific thing that we can all get hold of. It's true the President has proposed a 10-year program of housing. The sad thing is that in the fiscal year 69 budget, the proposal is only for $1.1 billion, which compares unfavorably with the current budget, which is $2.9 billion for housing. Now, this is, I think, the kind of thing that we can, all of us, work together on. And there's no disagreement, certainly not with me on this. This is the kind of thing that we can build on and move forward on. Now, there is a problem of money, and we can't kid each other about that. I personally hope we get the war in Vietnam over with, and we can begin to use the strength of the economy to deal with this housing problem. The growth of the economy to the extent of $10 billion in the current year would, of course, be a tremendous lift for this city problem.
The true sickness of this nation. Absolutely. While we go over it, now I just want to point this up. You are talking about the President has proposed a 10-year plan for housing, which is totally inadequate, even if it was 1 year. Right. But you can find money. They shot down 2 planes the other day that should have been here on the ground someplace, cost over $11 million. You can find money to fight that war in Vietnam, and the people in this country has expressed themselves explicitly that this is an unjust war. It's a civil war. If you can find money to put man on the moon, if you can find money to burn little brown babies in Vietnam with Naton bombs, why can't you find money to put black men on their feet in this nation?
Mr. Kilpatrick, I would like to call upon you, sir, to speak.
Well, just a moment.
Just a moment, gentlemen. We must have our additional 2 guests. I'm sorry. Right. Mr. Kilpatrick, could you speak?
But the other guest did not answer, Mr. Nevin. The other guest did not answer the question about Mr. Brown. He said he would answer it right after that. It's important that he speak to the question of Rap Brown situation. Why was it that section was eliminated from the President's Commission on Civil Disorders? Why was that section deliberately left out, which vindicated and Rap Brown's action in Cambridge and showed that he was not the criminal, but in fact was the white sheriff? It's very important for him to answer that question before the program proceeds.
Well, let me say that I was not a member of the President's Commission on Riots. If I had been, I could answer it. And not having been a member, I can't answer it.
Mr. Kilpatrick, would you express the viewpoint of those members of Congress who yesterday voted against the bill?
I'd like to address myself, if I may, generally to the bill. Mr. Niven, the act that the President signed this afternoon is entitled An Act to Prescribe Penalties for Certain Acts of Violence or Intimidation and for Other Purposes. That misleading and inadequate title is a fair beginning to a very misleading and, I think, inadequate bill. I never thought I would agree with Mr. McKissick or Mr. Foreman on much of anything, But when Mr. McKissick said he didn't think very much of this bill, I found myself in absolute agreement with him. When Mr. Foreman suggested that the bill has authoritarian aspects, I certainly agreed with him also, though for very different reasons. And when Mr. Williams said that it was a peanut sort of bill for an underfed elephant, I was in agreement with him also. But as I say, for different reasons. The bill has, I think, as a conservative, its good aspects. I know very little about the American Indian, but the section of the bill that deals with constitutional rights for American Indians, I think, is probably constructive. That section of the bill that deals with riots, contrary to what was suggested earlier, seems to me fairly clear.
Mr. Kirkpatrick, may I ask you a question? Would you say...
would you wait and let Mr. Kirkpatrick finish, please?
I feel like Senator Mondale being filibustered so far, gentlemen. Let me have at least one or two words here.
I just wanted to see...
I just wanted to read the bill, Mr. McKissick. You certainly ought not to object to that. The Act defines a riot as a public disturbance by one or more persons part of an assemblage of three or more persons whose acts constitute a clear or present danger of or shall result in damage or injury to the property of any other person or to the person of any other individual. Now that is certainly by no stretch of the imagination an encroachment upon free speech. In fact, the bill specifically accepts the advocacy of ideas and the expression of beliefs from its definition of a riot. The other part of the bill, to which reference was made a moment ago, dealing with civil disorders, makes it unlawful for any person to teach or demonstrate to any other person the use, application, or making of any firearm or explosive or incendiary device or technique capable of causing injury or death to persons. I truly don't see how much objection could be taken to that passage. My own objection, Mr. Niven, is that in the body of the bill, the main feature, the Title VIII fair housing part of the bill, the Congress has now undertaken, in my own opinion, to enact the most sweeping encroachment upon rights of private property that it ever has undertaken to do. And it has done this without the usual committee consideration, which is vital to an orderly legislative process. It has done this, in my own view, in violation of those constitutional provisions on which the Act presumptively is based, that is to say, the Commerce Clause in the 14th Amendment. So I think it is a bad bill. I'm sorry it was passed for quite different reasons from those advanced so far. I would oppose this bill just as much as the gentleman in New York.
For different reasons.
Mr. Field, your title at the U.S. Conference of Mayors is Director of Community Relations. Here we have a bill which narrowly passed the House of Representatives in urgent, unusual circumstances. Yet all three of our guests in New York are agreed that it is certainly not an advance and in some respects perhaps a retrogression. What future do you see for community relations in this country given this total impasse?
Well, we've heard that the bill is too little, and Mr. Kilpatrick thinks that some of it is too much. But I think quite clearly everybody would have to agree it's too late. We have not only needed clarification on public policy for a long time, but the context in which we are now discussing this measure is one that has had 3 long, hot summers, very recent distressing and disastrous events. And if we don't clearly understand in this country that it is too late not to address ourselves to the question of national priorities and to rearrange them significantly on a scale equal to the need, then we cannot but expect a continuation of the kind of frustration and the kind of fears that they will in turn generate in all of the communities of this country. This is an urban nation, and we have not recognized that the urban condition is sick.
I would like to say something at this point, Mr.
Yes,
Neville, if I may. I've been trying to hold back. First of all, I'd like to say that we must reach this conclusion that the government, this is the richest nation on the face of the earth. Money is not going to solve this problem, and white people with all the money in the world ain't going to solve the problem as far as I'm concerned and as far as black people concerned. We are going to solve our problem. White people cannot tell us what's wrong with us. We know. We know what we want, and we're going to have to solve this problem. So when you start talking about a 10-year program for housing for black people, you just off base. You aren't talking about what's relevant today. What we are talking about, your money can't do it, and you're developing a program for us can't do it. We know our own programs. We've got them developed. And what we really got to understand...
Could you outline those programs, Mr. McKissick?
We've been talking about them all along. We're talking about some power in the hands of black people. And we're sick of white people coming into the community trying to tell us what to do and how to do it. And we've reached the point where we don't even want white money if white money is going to tell us what to do. And I don't think white people are really getting the message because they don't have the capacity to listen. We've been talking black power for a long time. And we're saying that power must be in the hands of black people to make up their own minds and their own decisions and their own programs, and all three of us.
What kind of power, Mr. McKissick, and is it obtainable through existing political processes?
I'm talking about control of our own communities. I'm talking about control of our communities. I'm talking about control of Harlem. I'm talking about control of Roxbury, Massachusetts. I'm talking about control of the District of Columbia. I'm talking about control of the areas where we constitute clearly a majority. We can make our own laws if you make the laws.
Can you obtain this power through existing political processes?
We would hope that this power can, yes, it could be if the white man were not so racist. If he decided, even if you pass these laws, I know how they're going to be enforced because I know who's been enforcing them.
Well, it wasn't the white man who was in the black communities of Washington this past Friday and Saturday night. That was the black man.
Yeah, wait just a moment. That's right. That's right. Yeah,
right.
You said, wait a moment. Who was white? The federal guards were there. The federal troops were there. Johnson National. Wait just a moment. I mean, we're talking about white racism and white fascism, which is being undergirded and promoted in the black community by the police. The stoner guns that are being bought in Detroit, which has been outlawed by international law. Some 500 stoner guns have been bought there, and also in Newark, and also in in Philadelphia. We're talking about the kind of police action we know is being directed toward the black community. This is purely racism and fascism, which is developing in the white community. Just a moment, no. And then I got the platform, and I've been quiet. And then when you got a president who takes the troops that come in from Vietnam after they have no business over there, send them into the black community to mow down people. This is clearly, man, a move toward fascism. And we have to understand that that's the key problem. The police who occupy our communities, tomorrow I may be out in Oakland, California, where a young man was shot down cold-blooded. His name was Bobby Hutton, 22 years old, by the police as he walked out of the door with his hands up, saying, I surrender, I haven't done anything. But the police had lobbed over 300 canisters of tear gas, 50-millimeter shotguns had been blown away. The Minister of Information for the Black Panther Party, Self-Defense, of which I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs, proudly say that, is now crippled and in a hospital, and his parole is being violated. We have to understand that the problem is racism and fascism, which is being perpetuated in this country by the police and by these federal troops, which Johnson calls the arm of the law to protect white America. And that's precisely what's happening. He wants it to protect white America.
Mr. Foreman, do you suggest, sir, that when people riot and loot and commit arson, that policemen and firemen and federal troops should take no action whatever?
I am not suggesting that. I am saying that the United States of America is so sick and infested with racism through every corner of this society that it cannot save itself. Because the racism is like a cancer which is right before doomsday, before the person dies. That's what's happening.
Congressman Mathias.
Well, now look, there's very interesting things happening here in this area, just as we talked a minute ago about housing. Housing is a problem for whites and blacks alike, and our housing in this country,
there is no
our housing is inadequate. It's very inadequate for blacks. It's very inadequate for many whites. And I want to see a great deal better housing. But let me just show you on this question of local community control. Now, this is an area which is, this doesn't have to be an area of racial discrimination one way or another. There are many communities, all white, there are many all black, there are many mixed that want more local control. They ought to have more local control. And I'm glad to say that the Congress is beginning, and I've been urging this for years, the Congress is beginning to realize that nobody's going to get anywhere in the urban centers of America unless there is local initiative, local responsibility, local action, and local control. And I think this is one of the major steps, one of the departures that we have made in the last couple of years, and one of the encouraging factors. And there's no color line in this. Everybody's interested in it.
Let me give you an education. And you know, it's hard for me to understand all these good schools you white folk go to, and all the good living you do, how uninformed and really how ignorant you are. Now you go on and say there's white folks need housing and black folks need housing. This is like a Christian need to go to heaven and a sinner need to go to heaven. Listen, here's the thing I want to say to you. You talk about local control, and you don't understand it at all. The type of local control we are talking about, we want schools. But in those schools, we want to decide what our children ought to learn.
Right.
We want to teach our children
Right.
that George Washington Carver saved the Southland and not Bilbo and Herman Talmadge in Eastland. Wait a minute now. You're not local control. We want to control those schools. And you control black people and keep them in slavery by controlling our school. The school in the black community is not responsive to the black people in that community. It's responsive to a white board of education downtown that controls the money.
Right.
Go take here's one of the, we're talking about local control. In every ghetto, this is one of the great myths. They say, why black people riot and burn up their own neighborhood? No black folk ever rioted and burned up their neighborhood. They have burned up some neighborhoods that white folk own, but they lived in them. What we are talking about, it's all right if a man don't want to live in our neighborhood. That's his privilege. That's his freedom. We give him that privilege. But take your store and you market out your neighborhood where you live. And stop staying in our neighborhood, robbing us, exploiting us, taking the money out there. We want our money to stay in our neighborhood. We want to control the stores, all of the businesses in our neighborhood. I'm going to give you one more example. The police. You can take the same policeman, put him in the black community, and get caught speeding, and he'll run up to you and say, nigga, where the so-and-so hell are you going? Take that same policeman working out in the white community, and they'll say, mister, you are running a little too fast. We must control the police power in our community.
Right.
The same thing about politics. White people keep us so poor. You know, and you need to understand what it means to be black, mister. You need to understand what it means for a black woman to have to get up out her bed in the morning and go over to a white neighborhood and raise white children while them little black children have to raise themselves. You're talking about rioting. I want to ask Mr. Kirkpatrick a question. I want to come back to this, see, because this is real important about who was rioting in Washington over the weekend. Who was rioting? Was it black people responding to violence, or was it the black people themselves violence? You see, those people didn't just up and start taking out of stores. This nation is so sick, and Lyndon Smith wrote about it, The Killers of the Dream, where you go to church every Sunday morning praying to a God, and you don't think about that God for the other 6 days. You're stealing and robbing and cheating one another.
All around the world, incidentally.
Let me finish it. I want to say this. You teach us this material value. You got to have values, material values, to be somebody. Yet still you work us all day long, a full day's work for half a day's pay. Why you think black men don't even have the love of their wives early in the morning? Because she's over at a white man's house cooking for him, bringing out food aromas while his wife is still in his arm. And you have to understand this. These black people have lost hope. In the nonviolent movement, I'm going to say this to my hush.
Mr. Kilpatrick.
In the nonviolent movement, Mr. Kirkpatrick, white society has refused to respond. And all that was the other day was a little conscious mess that Congress drew up.
That's
you
right.
see, we come to you in the name of nonviolence, asking you to do justice, asking you to implement that law that you already put on the books. I don't care how many laws they write in Washington. Who writes them? White folks write them. Who implements them in Alabama? White folks implement them in Alabama. The black man never benefit. So you got to understand. But one thing, black people will be free, or you can forget about yours. Or you can think about this.
Mr. Kilpatrick, would you answer?
So much to try to respond to in a few minutes there. But I haven't heard so much segregationist talk really since the days immediately after Brown versus Board of Education. When I was
Now,
down
when
in
a black
Alabama.
man stands up and says something,
You're going to let somebody on this side of
answer
it speak for a moment or two, if you don't mind.
I do mind you calling us segregationists, man.
You're the ones who were saying you wanted black power within your communities.
Black men telling you crackers what we think.
You want black power within your black communities, and this is fine. You want no part, I judge then, of any white capital to help establish stores, build buildings, none of that. No part of white capital, no part of white advice, assistance, nothing. Nothing. Very well. I think this is fine. I think this is fine. You also want to teach your own schools and to decide what is to be taught in your schools. But I wonder if this isn't quite a reversal of the position that used to be taken about Southern white school boards. It used to be a terrible objection to Southern white school boards deciding what would be taught to white children, which is precisely, if I understood Mr. Williams correctly, the power and the authority that they're asking for their own school boards.
We are not telling white folk what to teach in their schools. We would like for them to teach true American history and stop lying to their children. But we're asking white folks, don't you tell us what to teach in our school.
Get example of IS 201, Floyd. I mean, with Herman Ferguson when they wanted to have the Malcolm Day program and the white school board downtown said no, black children couldn't have a Malcolm Day program. Herman Ferguson, who was kicked out because the brother stood up and was talking about bird shooting.
Now let me just run down one point to you gentlemen in Washington very clearly, and make no mistake about it. My point of view is I'm a nationalist. I believe that I'm as good as anybody. I believe that I don't have to live next door to a white man to prove who I am or what I am. I believe that economically, you don't want to live next to me if you pass a housing bill. The only reason you pass a housing bill is to give me a right to try to run and live next door to some white man, and that ain't going to make me one way or the other. I believe that if you don't want me in this society, well, brother, good, because I'm going to go set up my own thing over here, and I'm going to teach my children what to do. The values in this society are sick. The Attorney General of the United States said this past Sunday, Ramsey Clark, that there were no concentration camps in this United States. I'm a lawyer, and I say it right here now that the Attorney General lies to the American public, or else Title II of the McCarran Act has never been passed, and Harry S. Truman himself even says this is an ominous bill containing many different legislative proposals which are supposed to be anti-communist. But when analyzed in detail, it is a startling result appears. And he's talking about the McCarran Act, which sets up that. And then let us look one more time at the President of the United States. The President of the United States is right now waging an unauthorized war. Now the President, that's one. While not, he could wage that same kind of unauthorized war into helping black people. He's got executive powers, and the president himself could have passed the housing bill without the Congress doing it.
Mr. McKissick, Mr. McKissick, may I ask whether the growing number of Negro mayors, Negro school board mayors, members, and Negro councilmen is not a step, at least, in the direction which you're advocating?
It's a step, but it's just a short step. And the burden is too often is put upon black people. The burden has got to be put upon white people. And just this little step by step, this citizenship where you're giving it to somebody with an eyedropper ain't going to save the white man. And I think if the white man has got to start looking in another direction, and he doesn't know how to solve the problem, he's not capable of solving the problem. The President's Committee, the Committee on Civil Disorder, came out with some recommendations, and the President even wanted to say it's a bastard child, and I don't want to own it.
John Field.
Dr. King said this.
I wonder if I can
say this.
John Field, just a moment, please. John Field.
Well, I wanted to take us in a slightly different direction. I wanted to try to...
I hope you take us back to the racism in American society.
I want to go back because the white folks know that one or two little mayors we got.
Well,
gentlemen, it's hard to do this in two cities. Mr. Field.
I'm perfectly happy to have any member...
Mr. Field, New York Director, would you kindly cut the sound in New York and allow Mr. Field to proceed for a moment?
Well, Paul, let me...
The sweetness of freedom. See, that's what that is. You do no more than frustrate us and cause us to lose more hope and faith in this nation. It does one thing, helps more educate us how entrenched racism and how truly sick this society is. But it ain't fathering our cause.
Mr. Field.
Get to be mad he appoints four white men to head everything.
I don't mean to interrupt anybody, Paul. I just wanted to try to see if we couldn't add some other items to the agenda for this discussion and make it a discussion. I don't mind going to church and being preached to, and I don't mind doing a little preaching. But I would like to try to add a couple of items to the discussion. My feeling is, and it's just, it may be different than anybody else's, it may be the same. I think it has to do with racism. And I think it's quite clear that the reason our priorities are as they are is because we have not really addressed ourselves in the degree that we should to the kind of needs that we have in this nation. The disparities in the style and the quality of life of people in this country because of their origin or their race are really fantastic, and they always have been. And one of the great struggles this country has tried to go through all these years is try to keep closing these disparities, always late, for every last group that came in here. We're in the middle of a great divide at this point in the race issue in this country. It's taken us 100 years to get to that divide.
Go ahead.
No, the Puerto Ricans are a little later, and I suppose the Mexican Americans down in the Southwest are even still a little later than that. And they're going to have disparities too. The key questions, I think all of us would agree, do resolve themselves around public policy. It isn't a question of whether we're going to use white money or black money. It's a question of whether we're going to use that public money, which we have for every other grouping of disadvantaged and denied people in this country. Almost all of the communities of this country have been developed out of the public good, out of the public largesse. The tax policies, the investment policies are government policies. They're not Mr. Rockefeller's policies. He gets slammed around once in a while in that Congress, too. I'm sure he's more aware of that than I am. But the key question is, are we going to develop some public policies that will help us reconstruct these cities, close the disparity between the kind of condition of housing that Negroes live in as against the larger white community, which is vast. I think Congressman Mathias is as well aware of that as any of the rest of us. But the key question is, are we going to use these public dollars on a scale, on a time scale, that's equal to the problem? Now, sure, it's racist. It's racist because we're dealing differentially between what we're doing generally and what we ought to be doing to close this gap. And I think this is the kind of perspective that if we can bring to this problem, we're going to make some progress on it. It is too late. But I do believe in redemption, and I do think that we ought to redeem some of this time we've lost.
Congressman Mathias, will we? Will the Congress do?
I think the Congress is going to do very much better in this area than has been feared. I think there is a tremendous gap to be closed. I agree completely. And I think we're going to address ourselves to this problem. And as I say, I cited the housing thing as an example of where we are behind this year from where we ought to be behind even the current year.
Do a majority of your constituents in Maryland favor even the bill that you voted for yesterday?
Well, I would hope that a majority of them will accept that bill. I think so.
And you keep wondering what's going to happen in the streets this summer. And all you got to do is turn on your radio and listen to what the impressions are singing. And when the impressions saying we're a winner, you're talking about black folks. We're a winner, we ain't going to take it. And the song says, if it means that we got to leave this sweet earth, we're going to do it. And you don't hear, and you won't listen to us now that you got us out here trying to say something. And let's at least be constructive. I don't know whether you're running for office or not, but you're not going to use us anymore for a political football to get votes.
That's right.
And we're trying to tell you that you are not diagnosing the problem. And if you would let us try to tell you how to solve the problem, maybe you can solve it. But if you're going to criticize, us and really try to say you're closing the gap, black folks ain't interested in your closing no gap for them. They'll close their own gap with the wherewithal to do it. And we ain't begging you, we ain't asking for you, because we never did get the 40 acres and a mule that you promised us when we marched through Atlanta for the Union Army and helped General Sherman, and Sherman gets all the credit for it. But it was the slave uprisers that moved with Sherman.
Well, does Mr. McKenzie just want to be left alone?
Hold it, just a moment, because see, nobody in Washington has addressed themselves to the question of the racism which is inherent in the police department and in the federal guards and in the National Guard. Nobody is willing to say that Rap Brown should be out of jail when the President's Commission clearly reports that. Nobody is willing to say Stokely Carmichael is not public enemy number one. He's not responsible for what's happening in this country in terms of the uprising of black people. No, black people themselves are tired of their deprived conditions. Nobody's willing to say that the police should be demilitarized in these countries. There's no, I mean, you've got stoner guns and tanks and so forth. And that kind of repression which they're bringing down is going to bring retaliation. It has to. Nobody...
Look, I really think...
I want to speak to the police. Tell me about the police.
Well, don't overshoot the mark. Stoner guns below me.
In other words, you're telling me that I've been oppressing, so I'm on television.
Get your eye on the truth a little bit. The stoner guns weren't bought by the Detroit Police Department. You must believe in some of those white newspapers you're reading to scare the white folks. They don't own any stoner guns out there. Now, I mean, don't listen. Look, that's not to say we don't have plenty of problems in the dealing with police departments. We have plenty of problems, but don't overshoot the mark. That's not going to do anybody any good except scare everybody.
Yeah, it's going to scare black people when they can shoot through 10 inches of steel plus 10 men. In other words, a black man can be in his house and the stoner gun can shoot him down. Don't tell me we don't have stoner guns in this country when right over your own television they're talking about the stoner guns which the Detroit police is buying,
Well,
and which the Newark police is buying.
Let me just
then I would like
let me
to
just
really
correct the
address-
This
record
is a
because
question of fact.
Can
they
we
don't
talk
have
about
stoner
some
guns in the
program?
Detroit Police Department.
Can
Period.
we talk about program? Can we talk about program?
Sure.
Mr. McKissick, can we get back
Can we talk about program again?
Mr. McKissick, we obviously have a failure of communication here, which is perhaps symbolic of the whole problem.
Yeah.
I understood you to say earlier that if black people will take over their school boards and their city councils, they will be able to do the job themselves. What is the obstacle to their taking over these
White
offices?
racism.
White racism.
How?
White racism, the inability to solve the problem, the inability to listen to black people, and the inability to let black people solve their own problems. You can't shell out money like we are peons and think that we are going to fall for simple. You mentioned Detroit a minute ago. You made one hell of a mistake in Detroit. You don't know how to solve the problem, and when people were trying to tell you how to solve it, you didn't want to listen to the advice. Up there, you can get all the integrationist Negroes you want to tell you how to solve the problem.
Mr.
But the
McKissick-
integrationists, can I finish, please? May I, please?
Please.
Man, go
All
ahead and
right.
finish. You don't have to
The
beg me.
integrationists up there can't solve no problem for you because they ain't in contact. And if they knew how, you wouldn't have the fires burning all over the country now.
Floyd, let me
You got to deal with the boat rockers if you're going to
Let
solve
Jose
your problem.
say
And if you don't deal with the boat rockers, you ain't going to solve it, brother.
Yeah, let me answer your question
Go ahead,
about
Jose.
how we can control our own communities.
Yes.
Now let me answer that. First thing, you've been saying that we rejecting white money. That's not white money up there in Washington.
That's our money.
That's our money.
Wait a
That's
minute now.
exactly right.
Wait just a minute. Yeah, that's our money that the white folks have taken from
Right,
us.
and all
That's
from
right.
around
And
the
not
world.
only that money in Washington is not white money.
Foundations.
When a black man has worked all day, a full day's work, labor, for half a day's pay, you're taking our money. Now, let me tell you how we can control our own schools. White boards of education, men and women who are product of a sick society, who are racist, controls the black schools. The principal that gets that job is one that those white folk approve and not one those black parents approve. Wait a minute. Listen to this. Even the curriculum, don't you know that's not a black man with 10 cents worth of brain that would not put black history and
Right.
teach our children our...
Teach,
Wait a minute, let me
teach.
finish now.
Teach.
Black culture. You see, that's when some of my Jewish friends start talking about the difference in Jewish suppression and depression compared with the way black folks have been depressed. You have to understand, you robbed us of the greatest thing that God can give one. You robbed us of our culture.
That's right.
This is worse than raping
Took
a
us from
3-year-old
Africa.
girl.
That's
To
right.
rape a 3-year-old girl, you destroyed one life. But to rob a group of their culture, you destroyed millions of lives.
Stole us from
let me get back to the
Teach,
school
brother,
thing.
go ahead.
Let me get to the school thing.
Go ahead, Alfred.
Even the books, the textbooks that are purchased are not textbooks approved by the black folks who got on them black children, but by white racists downtown.
Slaveholders.
And their only relationship to the black community is through a maid or butler or some janitor at the Board of Education. What we would like to do, we would like for the parents of that school, we got more sense than you think we got. And I tell you another thing, you white folk better wake up. Ain't no way in the world we can mess this world up worse than y'all have already messed it up.
Time is up.
Mr.
Time is up.
Kilpatrick, any comment?
A comment on racism generally, if I can voice it. It seems to me that if racism is defined as the stirring up willfully of hatred of another race, that the most rabid racists in the United States in the past few months or several years have not been white segregationist crackers at all. They have, on the contrary, been Negro leaders such as Mr. McKissick, such as Rap Brown,
Martin
such as
Luther
Stokely
King.
Carmichael.
Go ahead, say
No, I
that
certainly
thing.
didn't.
Yeah,
No.
We don't
you,
accept
man.
your
We don't-
definition
we
of
don't-
racism.
but
No,
you see-
man.
All right.
Wait just a moment. That is, we
You don't
we
like
do
a
not
definition of
accept your
racism.
definition of racism. We will give you a definition of racism.
Quick.
Definition of racism. I'm gonna give him a definition of racism. A definition of racism in the American context is when some thieves and thugs from Britain came over to the United States and sent some ships down into Africa, and because they had superior firepower and were able to enslave us. And remember, man, superior firepower is not anything which is inherent, because for 15,000 years black people ruled this earth. Now we have a white interlude in terms of white Western civilization, which has been up in the dominance for about 300 to 400 years, and your time is up. It's just a question of 50, 60 years. It doesn't matter how many leaders you kill. Doesn't matter if you kill Rap Brown. Doesn't matter if you kill Stokely Carmichael or any other leader. The point is that black people all around this world, in South Africa, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Vietnam, in China, and so forth, are destined to end the kind of exploitation that the white Western civilization has been putting down on us.
The distinguished and erudite gentleman was about to define racism for me, and I lost his definition. Would he?
Well, you go ahead, because I want to hear you.
Let me know.
That's what I want to hear.
This was an attack upon me, Jose.
Yeah, but I want to hear him, because see just
this was
how uninformed you really are, how sick white people really are.
That's right. Mr. Kilpatrick, I would like to say, you know, we met before on a couple other platforms.
Yes, we have.
And, of course, I'd like to say that, you know, sticks and stones may break my bones and they will never hurt me. It's black people who make me what I am, feed me, nurture me, and keep me going, and that's all I'm interested in. If I serve them, that's all right. I don't worry about what you say. Your sense of morality is way off base. There's one thing white folks can't teach black folks.
Mr. McKenzie, can we get back to the
Wait a minute, let me tell you what racism is. Any society that can kill a Malcolm X and said this society killed Malcolm X because he was a man of violence, then turn around and kill Dr. King. And then all of the politicians in this country go down there to prostitute the funeral.
Right. Rockefeller leading the crew,
all of them
killing
go
black
down there to
people all over in South
It doesn't
Africa.
make you what philosophy any black man has, because this white racism will strike him down. Malcolm, Martin, or anybody else.
Sammy Young,
or anybody else.
Mr. McKenzie, can we get back, sir, to the central question of black power, which you raised early in the question? Is it your view that in a geographical area or political entity where Negroes are in the majority, they can gain the major political offices and then do what needs to be done by themselves?
I think that black people want to control their communities. They are demanding that control of the communities, and they are saying, white folks, get out. Let us control it. Let us control our schoolhouses. Let us build our own court and judiciary system.
Well, Mr.
We don't like capitalistic values.
Mr. McKenzie, with more and more Negroes voting every year, even in the South, what is stopping this?
I'll tell you what's stopping it. Here's what's stopping it. The fact of the matter is that black people in this country are a nation. Black people in this country are colonial subjects within the United States. And we have a right to form a nation on this particular territory, and we can take Indonesia. You have a whole series of islands that form the Indonesian nation. Just a moment, I'm about to answer your question. Now, don't do that. Now, we have a right to say for self-determination as any oppressed people anywhere around the world, and we can form our nation, and we will form a nation right within the context of this particular country. And it's in that sense that control of our communities has to be defined. We must be prepared to defend those communities with our lives. We must be prepared to drive out the foreign occupation armies such as the white cops, and that's what's happening out in Oakland, and that's why Huey Newton is in jail, and that's why Bobby Hutton was murdered by the police out there, because the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense said, black people, it is time for us to start defending our homes. Over 17,000 black people have been killed. 6,000 in terms of lynched. Not to talk about the other hundreds of thousands that have been killed in this country, not to talk about the 50 million black people who have been killed since 1619. Every white person in this country is horrified when we talk about 6 million Jews killed, but we don't talk about the 50 to 100 million black people that have been killed since we have been ruptured and taken away from Africa. And this generation understands that historical context, and we understand what white racism, or racism, because no black people are racist, but what racism is, and all of it is white. It is a product of white Western civilization. Sure, and that's why you can't solve these problems, because you're not prepared to give up your power.
Mr. Foreman, I take it this Negro nation you're advocating is
black nation, Afro-American nation.
Is a linking of Negro communities.
Linking of black communities.
What is to stop you achieving black power in communities where blacks are in the majority?
Because whites have superior firepower. You have federal guards and federal troops at this particular moment. You got superior firepower, but you don't have superior matches. And that's why this country is going to burn up, because black people are going to use those matches.
Congressman, we only have 2 minutes, gentlemen. I think we must give our Washington guest time to...
Let me try to exactly a word on that, Mr.
Let me say that I think that we are exhibiting here a new form of racism that is going to be make it very, very difficult to resolve the problems of this country. Now, you either got to decide. Now, you hold on. You just hold on up there a minute and sit down, and you just decide right now whether you're going to be builders or whether you're going to be destroyers. And that's That's a decision that we all of us have to make. As far as I'm concerned, I'm
You
prepared to
can't-
build.
Let me.
You prepare a bill to give us reparations.
I want to try to answer this question: why black people can't control that community where they're in the majority? Number one, they'll kill you. Dr. King was on the program that would have allowed us to control many of our communities by demanding our rightful share of the wealth of this nation, and they murdered him. He brought together Mexican Americans. He brought together Indians. He brought together white Appalachians. He brought together the Spanish speakers, and they murdered him. They murdered Malcolm X. Malcolm
Mr. Williams,
X.
I'm sorry, I must interrupt definitively this time. Our time is up. Our hour's time is up. I'm afraid the lesson of this hour is strongly that to expose racial problems in the United States in 1968 is to exacerbate them rather than to help solve them.
That's
Good
your
evening.
opinion.